And now your host for Rabbi's Rant, Rabbi Eric Walker.
Today's topic is parenting. I didn't become a parent until I was 37 years old. Oddly enough, that is also how old my father was when I was born. Next week, when Paul Batura, Vice President of Focus on the Family and author of Chosen for Greatness, How Adoption Changes the World, joins us, I will tell you the story about how I became a parent. But for today, I want to rant a little about our show's focus for today, parenting. You would think that a well-educated, articulate, successful businessman would intuitively know what to do with a child. In my case, a beautiful baby girl with the biggest blue eyes I had ever seen. But nothing prepared me for this continuing adventure called parenting. Most families have somewhere between 7 and 8 months advance notice that they're going to have a baby. But as I will share next week, I only had 6 weeks notice. To be very honest, I never really thought about having children. Being a father was not something that was on any list I had ever made, or from what I could recall of my youth with an older dad, nothing was really that compelling to me to want to have children. My relationship with my father was more defined by the words, "Wait till your father gets home," than anything else. He was the enforcer, the warden, the defender of the castle, the king of the realm. Since most of our impressions about parenting tend to be developed by how we are parented, I didn't have any desire to be the enforcer, the warden, or the defender of the castle. I was completely and totally satisfied just being the king of the realm. That all changed in 1989. I had no reservations about becoming a parent since I had finally reached a stage in life where I could reconcile my childhood and had the ability to choose to look back upon it as a happy one. I'm often heard telling people you are never too old to have a happy childhood. The parenting of a newborn baby took me on a journey of trial and error, and I became a parenting detective. Each day would be devoted to solving the mystery behind what each cry meant. Was it the hungry cry or the "I'm wet" cry? Was it the "I'm sleepy" cry or the dreaded "I have a present for you" cry? Through trial and error, we made it through those milestone moments of life, and she finally slept through the night, rolled over for the first time. She crawled, she stood up holding a chair, she took her first steps, she cut her first tooth, spoke her first word, she walked on her own, learned to use the potty, and began to develop her own personality. Up until that last milestone, parenting was fairly routine. But then there was that one major turning point, and the parenting dynamic radically changed. New concepts such as boundaries, time out, the testing of boundaries, daycare, and the ever-increasing vocabulary. Now we had to set expectations and use each opportunity to teach and nurture and try to help in the development of that personality. As time went on, there was soccer and t-ball, ballet, and activities with friends, and then one day, almost suddenly, she was asking for a cell phone so she could stay in touch with her friends. It was no longer cool for me to take her clothes shopping, just because I asked the salesperson if they had a turtleneck bathing suit. And my little girl was now a young woman, and the dynamic of parenting was changing. All of a sudden, I was transformed into the enforcer, the warden, the defender of the castle, and my kingship and dominion over the realm had been taken over by a daughter that knew her way around her daddy's heart. The only real skills I had to draw upon was my own upbringing, and I didn't want a parent like that. Without an instruction manual or guidebook, it became an adventure into trial and error again, but this time it was mostly error. Amanda was 6 when I accepted the Lord. Over time, I was introduced to more of a biblical parenting model, and Amanda's friends were now friends from the congregation. I was lulled into a very false sense of security, thinking that she would be surrounded by godly young men and women, and they would have a major impact on some of the issues about boundaries that we seem to be struggling with. It was then that my bubble was burst, and I faced the reality that being a believer does not insulate you or your child from peer pressure, temptation, the advances of a young suitor, or all the other challenges that face parents and their teenage children. I finally learned that a child's entire focus and natural inclination is to test the boundaries. This is not a bad thing, and in fact is what gives them the strength to develop independence and confidence. I sure wish I knew that at the time. I must admit we hit some rough patches along the way. I know of many things I would have done differently, but here we are, 27 years later, and she and I talk every day. We've spoken openly to each other about mistakes we made along the way. We have forgiven each other and have made the choice to harvest all the good and release all the bad. She has developed into a woman who has a tremendous work ethic, extraordinarily creative skills, a heart of gold, and is willing to accept any challenge that life has to throw at her. I'm not sure at what point it happened, but one day in prayer I asked the Lord to let me see my daughter the way He sees her. He instead showed me unconditional love and guided me to give her that same unconditional love. He took the burden of guilt I carried over mistakes I had made along the way and showed me the path and blessing of forgiveness. It was then I realized that we have treated our Father in heaven in much the same way as a rebellious child treats their parents. Yet our Father in heaven is loving and merciful, full of grace and an unending capacity to forgive. It was on that day that I hung these words over my daughter's bed. How often will my heart forgive you? My heart will forgive until the sun no longer shines, until the moon falls from the sky, until the stars no longer shine. My heart will forgive 10,000 times 10,000 until you finally realize there's nothing you can do to make me stop loving you. Isn't this the same message God has for each one of us? Isn't it time we started to walk in that forgiveness? I wasn't a candidate for Father of the Year, but one thing she always knew was that I loved her and I wanted to be her daddy. And that, my friends, is today's rant. A little glimpse into my parenting experience and paves the way for our three guests who will be joining us at the 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, and 12 o'clock hour to talk about their views on parenting and family. When we return, I will offer some more insights into that parenting experience. We'll be right back.